The silk blouse crumpled in my trembling hands was definitely not mine. Size small, emerald green, with a designer label I couldn't afford on my nurse's salary. I found it tucked behind David's side of the dresser, along with a pair of expensive, black lace lingerie that made my stomach turn. But what happened next, when I confronted him with the evidence, shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage, and led to a discovery so devastating, it would either destroy me completely or transform me into someone I never imagined I could become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I found those clothes, I was rushing around our modest 3-bedroom house in Maple Grove, trying to get ready for my 12-hour shift at Colorado General Hospital. David had already left for his job at Blackwood Financial Group, or so I thought. I was searching for my favorite cardigan when I accidentally knocked over his cologne bottle, and as I bent down to retrieve it from behind the dresser, my fingers brushed against soft fabric that shouldn't have been there. My name is Emma Collins, and up until that moment, I genuinely believed I was living the American dream. At 34, I had been married to David for 8 years, together for 10. We met during my final year of nursing school at the University of Colorado, Denver, when he was just starting his career in commercial real estate. He was charming, ambitious, and had this infectious confidence that made me believe we could conquer the world together. I was drawn to his drive, his certainty about our future, and the way he seemed to have everything mapped out. Those early years were beautiful in their simplicity. We lived in a tiny apartment near campus, surviving on ramen noodles and shared dreams. David would study market reports while I memorized medical procedures, and we'd quiz each other late into the night. He'd always tell me that my compassion and intelligence were exactly what he needed to stay grounded while he climbed the corporate ladder. "You're my anchor, Em," he'd say, pulling me close after a particularly stressful day. "Without you, I'd just drift away into all that corporate nonsense." I threw myself into supporting his vision of our life together. When he landed his first real job at a small investment firm, I picked up extra shifts at the hospital to help cover our expenses while he established himself. When he wanted to pursue his real estate license to expand his opportunities, I encouraged him even though it meant less time together. When Blackwood Financial Group offered him a position that required entertaining clients and attending industry events, I learned to play the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and making small talk with people whose annual clothing budget exceeded my yearly salary. The house in Maple Grove represented everything we'd worked toward together. It wasn't fancy by Denver standards, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small backyard where we talked about maybe getting a dog someday. David had negotiated the purchase through his connections at Blackwood, getting us a deal that felt like validation of his growing influence in the industry. I remember the day we got the keys, how we slow danced in the empty living room while imagining the life we'd build there. For years, I convinced myself that our relationship was simply evolving as we matured. David's work demanded more of his time, and my career at the hospital was becoming increasingly fulfilling. I'd been promoted to charge nurse in the cardiac unit, a position that required significant responsibility and long hours, but gave me tremendous satisfaction. Saving lives, comforting families during their darkest moments, mentoring new nurses. This work felt like my calling. David was proud of my success, or at least he seemed to be during the brief conversations we managed between our conflicting schedules. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I chose to ignore. The late nights that became later, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way his phone was always face down when we were together. The gradual shift from we to I in his conversation, as if our shared dreams were slowly becoming his individual pursuits. The expensive gifts that appeared without explanation, a new watch, designer suits, a luxury car lease that seemed beyond what his salary should support. When I questioned these changes, David always had reasonable explanations. The late nights were necessary for closing important deals. The business trips were investments in his future, which was our future. The expensive items were either gifts from grateful clients or necessary tools for projecting success in his industry. "You have to spend money to make money, Em," he'd explain patiently, as if I didn't understand basic economics. "Everything I'm doing is for us, for the life we want to build." I wanted to believe him because the alternative was too frightening to consider. We'd built our entire life together around his career trajectory, his timeline, his vision of success. Questioning. That foundation would mean questioning everything we'd worked toward, so I convinced myself that his increasing distance was temporary, that once he reached whatever milestone he was chasing, we'd reconnect and reclaim the partnership we'd once shared. The morning I found those clothes, I'd been awake since 4:30, preparing for what promised to be a brutal shift. 3 nurses had called in sick, meaning I'd be covering extra patients in an already understaffed unit. David's side of the bed had been empty when I woke up, which wasn't unusual. He'd been leaving earlier and earlier for work, claiming he wanted to beat traffic and get a head start on his day. As I searched for my cardigan, muttering under my breath about being late, the cologne bottle slipped from the dresser edge and rolled behind the heavy oak furniture. Getting down on my hands and knees in my scrubs, I reached blindly into the narrow space, expecting to find dust bunnies and maybe a lost sock. Instead, my fingers closed around smooth silk that definitely didn't belong to me. The emerald green blouse was beautiful, clearly expensive, and absolutely not something I would ever own. The fabric felt luxurious between my fingers, the kind of silk that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. But it was the lingerie that made my blood run cold. Black lace, delicate and seductive, with tags from an exclusive boutique I'd only ever walked past in downtown Denver's upscale shopping district. I sat on our bedroom floor, holding these foreign clothes, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't misplaced laundry from our neighbor or forgotten items from a house guest. These clothes belonged to another woman, a woman who had been in my bedroom, in my marriage, wearing things designed to seduce my husband. My first instinct was denial. Maybe David was planning to surprise me with new clothes, though the sizes were all wrong and the style wasn't anything I'd ever wear. Maybe they belonged to his sister, though she lived in California and hadn't visited in over a year. Maybe there was some perfectly innocent explanation that would make me feel foolish for even considering infidelity. But as I examined the items more closely, denial became impossible. The blouse had a faint perfume scent that wasn't mine, something floral and expensive that seemed to linger in the fabric. The lingerie still had price tags attached, as if they'd been recently purchased, and worn only once. Most damning of all, I found a small jewelry box hidden beneath the clothes, containing a delicate gold bracelet with an engraving that read, SM, Forever Yours, D. SM. Not my initials, not my bracelet, not my husband's gift to me. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Something that would normally fill me with guilt, but now seemed insignificant compared to the evidence scattered across my bedroom floor. I spent the morning in a daze, alternating between fury and numbness, trying to process what this discovery meant for my life, my marriage, my future. Part of me wanted to confront David immediately, to demand explanations and force him to account for these foreign clothes in our shared space. But a larger part of me needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to handle this devastating revelation. In my nursing career, I'd learned the importance of gathering complete information before making critical decisions. Lives depended on thorough assessment and careful consideration of all factors. So I documented everything. I photographed the clothes, the jewelry, the exact location where I'd found them. I searched through David's belongings more systematically, looking for additional evidence of deception. In his dresser drawer, I found receipts for expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together, charges for hotel rooms during nights when he'd claimed to be working late at the office, payments to florists for arrangements I'd never received. The picture that emerged was devastating in its clarity. David hadn't just strayed from our marriage. He'd been living an entirely separate life, complete with romantic gestures and intimate encounters that he'd kept carefully hidden from me. The woman who owned those clothes wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a drunken mistake. She was someone significant enough to warrant jewelry, expensive lingerie, and what appeared to be regular overnight stays in our bedroom. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself oscillating between rage and heartbreak. The rage was clean and energizing. How dare he bring another woman into our home, into our bed, while I worked exhausting shifts to support our shared expenses. But the heartbreak was more complicated, shot through with humiliation and self-doubt. How long had this been going on? How many people knew about his affair while I remained obliviously faithful? What did this other woman have that I lacked? By the time David's car pulled into our driveway that evening, I had made a decision. I wouldn't confront him immediately with accusations and tears. Instead, I would give him an opportunity to tell me the truth voluntarily, to show me whether there was any integrity left in the man I'd married. If he chose deception over honesty, I would know exactly where our marriage stood. "Hey, babe," he called out as he entered through the garage, his voice carrying the casual affection that had once comforted me, but now felt like another layer of deception. "How was your shift? You seemed pretty stressed this morning." I met him in the kitchen, where he was loosening his tie and checking his phone with the distracted air that had become his default mode. He looked successful and confident in his tailored suit, every inch the rising young executive he'd worked so hard to become. But now I could see the performance in his posture, the calculated charm in his smile. "Actually, I called in sick today," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "I wasn't feeling well this morning after you left." His eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Are you okay? You never call in sick. Maybe you should see a doctor if you're not feeling better." "I'm fine now," I replied, studying his face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. "I spent the day cleaning and organizing, found some interesting things while I was at it." For just a moment, something flickered across his features, a tightness around his eyes that could have been confusion or could have been fear. But he recovered quickly, moving to the refrigerator and pulling out a beer with practiced nonchalance. "Oh yeah? Like what?" he asked, twisting off the cap and taking a long drink. "Please tell me you didn't reorganize my closet again. I just got everything arranged the way I like it." This was my moment. I could produce the clothes, the jewelry, the receipts, and force an immediate confrontation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Or I could continue gathering information, building a complete picture of his deception before deciding how to respond. In my nursing career, premature interventions often caused more harm than good. Sometimes the best approach was careful observation and strategic patience. "Just some old things that needed sorting," I said carefully. "Nothing important." He nodded absently, already scrolling through his phone again. "Good. Hey, I'll probably be working late again tomorrow night. Big presentation to prepare for Blackwood's largest client. Might not make it home until after midnight." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence as his morning goodbye kiss. How many fictional presentations and imaginary client dinners had he used to explain away his absences? How many times had I accepted these explanations without question, trusted him completely while he systematically betrayed that trust? "That's fine," I heard myself saying. "I'll probably pick up an extra shift anyway. We could use the money if you're going to keep buying expensive suits." He glanced up from his phone with a slight frown. "What do you mean? I haven't bought any new suits recently." "The receipts in your dresser suggest otherwise," I said quietly, watching his face carefully. This time there was no mistaking his reaction. The color drained from his cheeks and his hand tightened around his beer bottle. For several seconds, he said nothing, and I could practically see him calculating how much I might know and how best to respond. "I bought one suit for the Henderson account presentation," he finally said, his voice slightly defensive. "It was a necessary business expense. You know how important appearances are in my industry." "Of course," I agreed, though we both knew I was referring to more than just clothing purchases. Appearances are extremely important. The rest of the evening passed in tense normalcy. We shared dinner while discussing safe topics like my work schedule and his upcoming projects. He asked about my day with what seemed like genuine interest, and I found myself marveling at his ability to maintain this facade of concerned husband while hiding such significant deception. That night, as we lay in bed together, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other women had shared this space with him. The thought made my skin crawl, but beneath the revulsion was something else, a cold determination that surprised me with its intensity. David might have thought he was clever, maintaining his perfect marriage while pursuing whatever excitement this other woman provided. But he had underestimated me completely. I had spent years supporting his ambitions, sacrificing my own desires to help him build the career he wanted. I had been patient, understanding, and loyal while he transformed from the idealistic young man I'd fallen in love with into someone I barely recognized. But I wasn't the naive nursing student he'd married anymore. 8 years of working in a cardiac unit had taught me how to remain calm under pressure, how to make critical decisions quickly, and how to fight for what mattered most. As David's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep beside me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would discover the full extent of his betrayal, document every detail, and plan my response with the same methodical precision I used to save lives at the hospital. He might have thought he was smarter than me, more sophisticated, more deserving of whatever happiness he was pursuing with his mystery woman. But he was about to learn that the compassionate nurse he'd taken for granted possessed a strength and determination he'd never bothered to notice. The emerald silk blouse and black lace lingerie were just the beginning. Tomorrow, I would start gathering the evidence I needed to understand exactly who my husband had become and what that meant for the future I thought we were building together. Whatever truth I uncovered, however devastating it might be, I would face it with my eyes wide open and my plan already in motion. The woman who had worked extra shifts to support his dreams was about to discover what she was truly capable of when those dreams became her nightmare. The next morning, David left for work with his usual kiss on my forehead and promised to call me later. I waited exactly 30 minutes after his car disappeared around the corner before I began my investigation in earnest. My first stop was his home office, a converted spare bedroom where he kept files, financial documents, and his personal laptop that he always claimed was too boring for me to bother with. The laptop was password protected, but David had never been particularly creative with security. After 3 attempts, his mother's maiden name combined with our wedding year unlocked the screen. What I found there made the discovery of those clothes seem almost innocent by comparison. Email threads spanning back 18 months revealed a relationship far more complex than a simple affair. The woman was indeed someone named Sophia Martinez, but she wasn't just any woman. She was the daughter of Richard Blackwood, David's boss and the owner of Blackwood Financial Group. The emails between them chronicled not just romantic involvement, but detailed discussions about David's career advancement, strategic business, decisions, and most disturbingly, conversations about me that made my stomach turn. In one particularly painful exchange from 6 months earlier, Sophia had written, "When are you going to tell Emma? This sneaking around is getting exhausting, and Daddy is starting to ask questions about your availability for weekend client events." David's response was like a knife to my heart. "Soon, I promise. I just need to time it right. Emma's been so focused on her little nursing career that I don't think she'll even be that surprised. She's practically living at the hospital anyway." Another email thread revealed the true scope of their deception. They had been using our house for their encounters whenever I worked night shifts. with Sophia staying over regularly enough to keep clothes and personal items there. David had been systematically lying about his schedule to create opportunities for their relationship, telling me he was working late while actually taking Sophia to expensive restaurants and weekend getaways that I now realized explained his recent mysterious absences. But the most devastating discovery came in a folder labeled Future Plans. David had been actively planning to leave me for Sophia, but not until after he secured a promotion that her father had apparently promised him. The emails revealed a calculated timeline. David would continue our marriage until he was named a partner at Blackwood Financial, then file for divorce and immediately announce his relationship with Sophia. They had even discussed the financial implications, with David noting that keeping me unaware would prevent me from getting ideas about claiming half of his future earnings. Reading these cold calculations of my life and marriage, I felt something die inside me. This wasn't a passionate affair or a moment of weakness. This was a methodical dismantling of our relationship by someone who viewed me as an obstacle to overcome, rather than a person he had once loved. Every late night I had worked to help support our household expenses. Every social event where I had played the perfect corporate wife. Every sacrifice I had made for his career advancement had been accompanied by his secret planning for my eventual disposal. I printed every relevant email and document, creating a comprehensive file of evidence that painted a clear picture of David's deception. But as I worked, my nurse's training kicked in, and I found myself thinking beyond the immediate emotional devastation to the practical implications of what I had discovered. David's plan was sophisticated and carefully timed to minimize his financial obligations to me. He had been deliberately keeping me in the dark about the true scope of his career advancement and earning potential, while positioning himself for maximum benefit when he eventually abandoned our marriage. The emails also revealed something else that would prove crucial. David had been inflating his expenses and hiding income to create a false picture of our financial situation. He had been telling me we needed to be careful with money while simultaneously spending lavishly on his relationship with Sophia. He had secret accounts, undisclosed bonuses, and investment opportunities that he had never mentioned to me. The man who lectured me about picking up extra shifts to cover household expenses was actually earning far more than I had ever realized. After spending 3 hours documenting David's betrayal, I sat in his office chair and stared at the pile of evidence before me. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and throw the printed emails in his face and demand an explanation for his cruelty. But the larger part of me, the part that had learned to think strategically under pressure during medical emergencies, recognized that emotional confrontation would only put him on the defensive and give him time to cover his tracks or accelerate his timeline. Instead, I called my oldest friend, Rebecca Chen, who had graduated law school the same year I finished nursing school, and now worked as a family attorney in downtown Denver. Rebecca and I had maintained our friendship despite the demands of our respective careers, though I realized guiltily that I had been less available since David's work had begun requiring more of my social energy. "Emma, what a nice surprise," Rebecca said when she answered her phone between client meetings. "It's been too long since we've talked. How are things with you and David?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need legal advice, and I need it to stay completely confidential between us. Can you meet me somewhere private today?" The concern in Rebecca's voice was immediate. "Of course. Are you okay? You sound strange." "I will be," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. "But I need to understand my options before I make any decisions." We met at a small coffee shop near the University of Colorado Denver campus, far enough from David's downtown office that there was no chance of running into anyone from his professional circle. Rebecca took one look at my face and ordered us a private corner table, her expression shifting into the focused attention I remembered from our study sessions years earlier. "Tell me everything," she said simply, and I did. I laid out the entire situation, The clothes, the emails, the financial deception, the calculated timeline for my abandonment. Rebecca listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad she had pulled from her briefcase. When I finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, processing the information with the methodical approach that had made her one of Denver's most respected family attorneys. "Emma, I'm so sorry this is happening to you," she finally said, her professional composure softening momentarily. "But I have to ask, what do you want to do about it? Are you looking to save your marriage, or are you looking to end it on your terms?" The question forced me to confront something I had been avoiding since discovering those clothes. Did I want to fight for a marriage with someone who had been systematically planning to discard me? Could I ever trust David again, knowing the depth of his deception and the coldness with which he had calculated my future irrelevance? "I want to protect myself," I said slowly, the words feeling strange but right in my mouth. "I want to make sure that when this marriage ends, because it clearly is going to end, I'm not left with nothing while he rides off into the sunset with his boss's daughter and his partnership at the firm." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Good. That's exactly the right approach. Based on what you've told me, David has been committing financial fraud within your marriage by hiding assets and income. The fact that he's been planning this exit strategy while deliberately keeping you uninformed gives us significant leverage." She explained that Colorado was an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets should be divided fairly between spouses during divorce. David's attempt to hide his true financial situation and earning potential was not only deceptive but potentially illegal. The documented evidence of his affair with his boss's daughter could also be relevant, particularly if it had influenced his career advancement. "The key," Rebecca explained, "is to gather as much financial documentation as possible before he realizes you know about the affair. Once he understands that you're aware of his plans, he'll start moving money and covering his tracks. We need to move quickly to preserve evidence and protect your interests." I spent the rest of that afternoon in Rebecca's office, learning about asset protection, financial discovery, and the divorce process. It was surreal to be discussing the legal dismantling of my marriage while David was presumably at work, believing that his secret was safe and his plan was proceeding smoothly. Rebecca gave me a list of documents to locate and copy, financial accounts to research, and steps to take to protect my own credit and assets. "There's something else you should consider," Rebecca said as our meeting concluded. "David's relationship with Sophia and her father creates a complex dynamic at his workplace. If this affair becomes public knowledge before he's secured that partnership, it could actually damage his career rather than advance it. Office relationships, especially involving the boss's daughter, can be career suicide if they're not handled properly." This observation planted a seed of possibility that I hadn't considered. David and Sophia had been operating under the assumption that they could control the timing and narrative of their relationship reveal. But what if they couldn't? What if circumstances forced their hand before David had secured the career advancement he was counting on? I drove home that evening with a strange sense of calm purpose. The devastating emotional blow of discovering David's betrayal was beginning to transform into something else: determination. For 8 years, I had supported his ambitions, trusted his judgment, and subjugated my own desires to help him achieve his goals. Now, for the first time in our relationship, I was going to pursue my own interests with the same strategic focus he had taught me to admire in his business dealings. That night, David came home later than usual, claiming he had been working on a major client proposal that required perfect preparation. He seemed distracted and slightly guilty, avoiding eye contact and checking his phone more frequently than normal. When I asked about his day, his answers were vague and defensive, a stark contrast to the detailed work stories he used to share during our early years together. "You seem tired," I observed as we sat down to the dinner I had prepared. "Maybe you should take some time off once this big project is finished." He looked up sharply, as if searching for hidden meaning in my suggestion. "I can't take time off right now, Em. This is a crucial period for my career. There are opportunities opening up that could change everything for us." The irony of his words was almost amusing. He was right that opportunities were opening up that could change everything, but not in the way he imagined. While he was planning my eventual abandonment, I was planning my own version of strategic career advancement. "I understand," I said, sincerely. "I want you to succeed, David. I always have." This much was true, though my definition of his success was evolving rapidly. I wanted him to succeed in revealing his true character so completely that I could move forward with absolute clarity about our marriage's end. I wanted him to succeed in documenting his own deception so thoroughly that I would have every advantage in the legal proceedings to come. Most of all, I wanted him to succeed in underestimating me so completely that he would never see my own strategic planning until it was too late for him to counter it. Over the next week, I implemented Rebecca's advice with methodical precision. I copied financial documents, researched David's business activities, and documented every detail of his schedule and behavior. I discovered additional evidence of his relationship with Sophia, including credit card charges for jewelry, expensive dinners, and hotel rooms that painted a picture of a lavish affair funded partially by money he had told me we didn't have. But more importantly, I began to understand my own financial situation for the first time in our marriage. David had been managing all of our investments and major financial decisions, always explaining that his expertise in the field made him the natural choice for handling our money. I had trusted him completely, focusing on my nursing career while he handled our financial future. What I discovered was both encouraging and infuriating. Our shared assets were worth significantly more than I had realized, including investments that had grown substantially over the years. David had been systematically downplaying our wealth, while simultaneously hiding additional income and assets that should have been considered marital property. The modest lifestyle he had encouraged me to maintain was completely artificial, designed to keep me dependent and unaware of my true financial position. I also learned something crucial about myself during this process. I was far more capable of strategic thinking and financial planning than I had ever given myself credit for. Years of supporting David's career had taught me to understand business concepts, investment strategies, and market dynamics, even if I had never applied that knowledge to my own benefit. My nursing background had given me analytical skills, attention to detail, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. For the first time, I began to see these abilities as assets that belonged to me, not just tools for supporting someone else's ambitions. As my understanding of the situation crystallized, I realized that David's plan contained a fatal flaw. He was assuming that I would remain passive and cooperative during our eventual divorce, grateful for whatever settlement he chose to offer and eager to move on with minimal conflict. He had never seen me fight for anything because I had never needed to fight against him. But he was about to discover that the woman who had supported his dreams without question was perfectly capable of pursuing her own interests with equal determination. The opportunity to test this new resolve came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after my initial discovery, David announced that he would be attending a weekend conference in Aspen, a sudden business trip that required immediate departure and would keep him away from Friday evening through Sunday night. The timing was suspicious, and his explanation was vague, filled with the kind of corporate buzzwords he used when he was being deliberately evasive. "It's a high-level strategic planning session," he explained, avoiding my eyes as he packed his weekend bag. "Blackwood is sending only his top performers. It's exactly the kind of visibility I need for the next stage of my career." "That sounds important," I agreed. By Sunday afternoon, I had drafted a preliminary business plan for Emma Collins Financial Planning, specializing in wealth management for healthcare professionals. The plan included startup costs, potential client development strategies, and a timeline for obtaining necessary certifications and licenses. It was rough and preliminary, but it represented something concrete I could work toward while navigating the end of my marriage. When David returned from his Aspen weekend, he seemed relaxed and confident in a way that might have reassured me in the past, but now struck me as almost comically naive. He had no idea that while he was planning my eventual abandonment, I had been laying the groundwork for my own independence and professional success. "How was your weekend, Em?" he asked as he unpacked his luggage, his tone casual, but his eyes avoiding direct contact. "I hope you didn't work too much while I was gone." "Actually, I took some time off," I replied truthfully. "I needed to think about some important decisions I've been putting off." He nodded absently, already reaching for his phone to check. Messages he had apparently missed during his romantic getaway. "That's good. You've been working too hard lately. Maybe it's time to consider scaling back your hospital schedule, focusing more on our home life." The suggestion would have seemed supportive a month earlier, but now I recognized it as another element of his strategy to keep me financially dependent and professionally isolated. He wanted me to reduce my earning potential and professional connections just as he prepared to leave me for a woman whose family wealth would make my income irrelevant to his lifestyle. "Actually, I've been thinking about expanding my career opportunities," I said carefully, watching his reaction. "There are some interesting possibilities in healthcare consulting that might be worth exploring." For the first time since his return, David looked directly at me, his expression shifting from distracted contentment to sharp attention. "What kind of consulting? You've never mentioned being interested in anything like that before." "I've been learning a lot about business and financial planning over the years," I replied, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. "It seems like there might be ways to combine that knowledge with my medical background." His frown deepened, slightly. I appreciate your ambition, but consulting is extremely competitive. Most people who succeed in that field have years of specialized training and professional connections. It's not really something you can just decide to pursue without significant preparation." The condescending tone was familiar, the same gentle dismissal he had used whenever I expressed interest in anything beyond my established role as supportive wife and dedicated nurse. But now I could hear the underlying message clearly. He needed me to remain professionally limited and financially dependent until he was ready to discard me. My sudden interest in career expansion was an unwelcome complication to his timeline. "You're probably right," I agreed, though I had no intention of abandoning my plans. It was just a thought. He relaxed slightly, reassured that his control over my professional aspirations remained intact. We spent the rest of the evening in the kind of superficial domestic normalcy that had characterized our relationship for months. Shared dinner, casual conversation about work and current events, television watching that required no real interaction. David seemed satisfied that his weekend away had gone undetected, and that I remained safely unaware of his future plans. But everything had changed during those 3 days. While he had been celebrating his secret relationship and planning my eventual abandonment, I had been systematically dismantling the foundation of his deception and building the framework for my own independence. He thought he was managing a passive victim who would accept whatever settlement he chose to offer. In reality, he was now dealing with someone who understood his strategies, had documented his deceptions, and was actively preparing to outmaneuver him. The following week, I began implementing my plan with the same methodical precision I used in medical emergencies. I enrolled in an accelerated financial planning certification program that I could complete during my off hours from the hospital. I opened my own business banking account using funds from a savings account David didn't know I maintained. I met with business consultants who helped me refine my service offerings and identify potential clients within Denver's medical community. Most importantly, I began networking within my professional circle in an entirely new way. Instead of simply discussing medical topics with my colleagues, I started conversations about their financial planning needs, their experiences with investment advisors, and their frustrations with traditional financial services. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Healthcare professionals were eager to work with someone who understood their unique circumstances and could speak their language about professional challenges and opportunities. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of our cardiac surgery department, became my first unofficial client when she mentioned struggling to find an advisor who understood the complexities of physician income and liability planning. I offered to review her portfolio as a favor, applying the knowledge I had absorbed during years of listening to David's work discussions. My analysis revealed several opportunities for optimization that her current advisor had missed, and Dr. Mitchell was impressed enough to ask whether I was considering a career change. "You have a natural talent for this, Emma," she said after we reviewed my recommendations. "I've been working with financial advisors for 15 years, and you've identified issues in one meeting that they never addressed. Have you thought about making this more formal?" The conversation confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My years of supporting David's career had actually been an unofficial education in financial planning, and my nursing background provided skills that were highly valued in the advisory field. I wasn't starting from scratch. I was building on a foundation of knowledge and experience that I had been accumulating without recognizing its value. Within 3 weeks of David's return from Aspen, I had completed the preliminary coursework for my financial planning certification, established the basic framework for my consulting practice, and identified 5 potential clients within my professional network. The transformation was happening faster than I had dared to hope, driven by years of suppressed ambition finally finding an outlet. David remained completely unaware of these developments. His attention was focused on his relationship with Sophia and his pursuit of partnership at Blackwood Financial Group. "I hope it goes well for you." What I didn't tell him was that I had already confirmed through Rebecca's investigation resources that no such conference was scheduled in Aspen that weekend. David and Sophia were planning a romantic getaway, probably to discuss their timeline for making their relationship public and ending our marriage. They thought they were being clever, using business as cover for their personal planning session. They had no idea that their weekend escape would provide me with the perfect opportunity to complete my own strategic preparations. While they celebrated their future together, I would be securing mine. By the time David returned from Aspen, the balance of power in our relationship would have shifted permanently in my favor, though he wouldn't realize it until much later. As I watched his car disappear down our street that Friday evening, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. The marriage I had cherished was ending, but the woman who would emerge from its ashes was going to be stronger, smarter, and more independent than the person David had taken for granted. He thought he was embarking on a weekend of celebration with his future wife. In reality, he was giving me exactly the time and space I needed to ensure that his carefully laid plans would crumble around him. The naive nursing student who had fallen in love with his confidence and ambition was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned to value her own intelligence, trust her own instincts, and fight for her own future with the same intensity she brought to saving lives in the cardiac unit. David's weekend in Aspen was about to become the biggest mistake of his carefully calculated career. That weekend alone in the house felt like stepping into a parallel universe where I could finally think clearly without David's presence clouding my judgment. I had taken personal days from the hospital, something I rarely did, but I needed uninterrupted time to execute the plan Rebecca and I had developed. While David and Sophia enjoyed their romantic escape in Aspen, I was about to dismantle the financial foundation of his carefully constructed deception. My first stop was David's home office, where I systematically photographed every document, copied every file, and downloaded years of financial records onto an encrypted drive Rebecca had provided. The scope of his financial manipulation was staggering. He had been diverting portions of his bonuses into personal accounts, claiming business expenses for his affair with Sophia, and deliberately understating his income on our joint tax returns, while maintaining separate filings that showed his true earnings. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed his investment portfolio. David had been moving money from our joint accounts into individual investments worth nearly $400,000, funds that should have been considered marital property, but that he had been systematically hiding from me. He had created an elaborate paper trail designed to make these assets appear as though they belonged solely to him, predating our marriage, or earned through separate inheritance claims that I now realized were completely fabricated. As I documented each deception, I felt my anger crystallizing into something more powerful: absolute clarity about who David really was and what our marriage had meant to him. This wasn't just about Sophia, or even about his desire for career advancement. This was about a fundamental lack of respect for me as a person, a systematic effort to reduce me to a supporting character in his life story, while he positioned himself as the sole protagonist deserving of wealth, success, and happiness. The financial records also revealed something that would prove crucial in the coming weeks. David's promotion timeline at Blackwood Financial was more precarious than he had led me to believe. His relationship with Sophia was indeed influencing his career prospects, but not necessarily in the positive way he expected. Several email exchanges with colleagues suggested that other employees were aware of his involvement with the boss's daughter, and that this awareness was creating resentment and political complications within the firm. More importantly, I discovered that Richard Blackwood, Sophia's father, was facing his own business challenges. Blackwood Financial Group was being investigated by state regulators for questionable investment practices, and several major clients had recently terminated their relationships with the firm. David's assumption that marrying into the Blackwood family would guarantee his professional success was based on outdated information about the company's stability and reputation. This revelation sparked an idea that would reshape my entire approach to the situation. Instead of simply protecting myself during a divorce, what if I could position myself to benefit from the chaos that was clearly brewing in David's professional life? What if his carefully laid plans were actually more vulnerable than he realized? I spent Saturday evening researching Blackwood Financial Group's business practices, regulatory challenges, and client relationships. My nursing background had taught me to research medical conditions thoroughly before developing treatment plans, and I applied the same methodical approach to understanding David's professional environment. What I learned was fascinating and potentially devastating for his career prospects. Blackwood Financial Group specialized in managing investment portfolios for wealthy clients, but their methods were increasingly outdated, and their client service had deteriorated significantly over the past 2 years. Several online reviews and industry publications criticized the firm's lack of innovation, poor communication, and failure to adapt to changing market conditions. Richard Blackwood himself was approaching retirement age and seemed more interested in maintaining his lifestyle than investing in his company's future growth. This research led me to an unexpected realization. I actually understood the investment and financial planning industry better than I had ever given myself credit for. 8 years of listening to David's work discussions, attending industry events, and managing our household finances had given me substantial knowledge about portfolio management, client relations, and business development strategies. I had been absorbing this information passively, but I possessed a surprisingly comprehensive understanding of how the industry operated. More importantly, my nursing career had given me skills that were directly applicable to financial planning. The ability to assess complex situations quickly, communicate complicated information clearly to people under stress, and maintain calm professionalism during crisis situations. I had been building transferable expertise for years without realizing it, skills that could potentially launch me into an entirely different career path if I chose to pursue it. On Sunday morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks earlier. Instead of simply planning my exit from a failed marriage, I was going to use this crisis as an opportunity to completely reinvent my professional life. If David could plan a strategic career transition without my knowledge, I could certainly plan one without his. I called Rebecca and asked her to arrange a meeting with a business attorney who specialized in helping professionals start their own companies. I also researched the requirements for obtaining financial planning certifications in Colorado and discovered that my college education and professional experience met most of the prerequisites for entering the field. The idea of starting my own financial consulting practice seemed audacious, but no more audacious than David's plan to abandon our marriage for his boss's daughter. The more I thought about it, the more the idea made sense. Denver's medical community was filled with highly paid professionals who needed sophisticated financial planning services, but often received impersonal attention from large firms like Blackwood Financial. My nursing background would give me immediate credibility with healthcare workers who understood the unique challenges of medical careers. Irregular income patterns, liability concerns, retirement planning for physically demanding professions, and the need for advisors who understood their specific professional circumstances. I could build a practice specializing in financial planning for medical professionals, leveraging my industry knowledge and professional network to create something David had never imagined I was capable of achieving. Instead of being discarded by my husband for a younger woman with better family connections, I could emerge from this crisis as a successful entrepreneur with my own client base and professional reputation. This vision energized me in a way I hadn't felt since my early nursing career. For the first time in years, I was planning something entirely for myself, based on my own interests and abilities rather than supporting someone else's ambitions. The feeling was intoxicating and slightly terrifying, but absolutely right in a way that my marriage hadn't felt for longer than I cared to admit. He had become even more distracted and secretive, often taking phone calls in private and spending increasing amounts of time away from home. I suspected he and Sophia were finalizing their timeline for making their relationship public, probably planning to announce their engagement shortly after his expected promotion. The irony was delicious. While David was planning to leave me for a woman whose family connections would advance his career, I was building my own professional foundation. That would make his financial support irrelevant. He thought he was abandoning a dependent wife who would struggle financially after their divorce. In reality, he was about to discover that his biggest mistake wasn't underestimating Sophia's value to his career, but underestimating my capacity for independence and success. The momentum was building toward a confrontation that would reshape both our lives, but now I was approaching it from a position of strength rather than victimhood. David's carefully laid plans were about to collide with mine, and he had no idea that the woman he thought he could discard was actually several steps ahead of him in a game he didn't even realize we were playing. 3 months after discovering those clothes in my bedroom, my life had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible during those first devastating days. Emma Collins' financial planning was no longer just an ambitious idea, but a functioning business with 7 confirmed clients and a waiting list of healthcare professionals eager to work with someone who understood their unique financial challenges. The certification program I had completed ahead of schedule, and my business mentor had introduced me to a network of professionals who were actively referring clients to my practice. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's betrayal had inadvertently launched the most fulfilling career I had ever imagined. While he continued his secret relationship with Sophia, believing I remained safely unaware and financially dependent, I was building something that would ultimately make me more successful than he had ever been. The woman he planned to discard, for someone with better family connections, was quietly becoming a formidable entrepreneur in her own right. My breakthrough moment came when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, one of Denver's most prominent plastic surgeons, hired me to restructure her entire investment portfolio after her previous advisor had cost her nearly $50,000 in preventable tax liabilities. Dr. Walsh was not only wealthy but extremely well connected within Denver's medical and social communities. When my recommendations helped her recover those losses and optimize her retirement planning, she began recommending my services to her colleagues with the kind of enthusiasm that money couldn't buy. Emma has a gift for making complex financial concepts accessible, Dr. Walsh told anyone who would listen. She understands the medical field in a way that traditional advisors never could, and her recommendations are always practical and results-oriented. I should have hired her years ago. This endorsement opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Within weeks, I was managing portfolios for some of Denver's highest-earning medical professionals, and my monthly income had surpassed what I earned as a charge nurse. More importantly, I was discovering a natural aptitude for business development and client relations that surprised everyone, including myself. The financial independence was liberating, but the professional respect was even more meaningful. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something entirely my own, based on my skills and vision rather than supporting someone else's ambitions. The confidence this generated affected every aspect of my life, from the way I carried myself to the decisions I made about my future. David noticed the change, though he had no idea what was causing it. I had become less available for his social obligations, more assertive in our conversations, and increasingly disinterested in his work stories that had once commanded my complete attention. When he complained about feeling disconnected from me, I simply explained that I was exploring new interests and needed space to grow as an individual. "I'm proud of you for wanting to develop yourself, Em," he said one evening, though his tone suggested anything but pride. "I just hope you're not getting in over your head with whatever you're pursuing. Sometimes people think they're ready for challenges that are actually beyond their capabilities." The comment would have undermined my confidence 6 months earlier, but now it simply confirmed that David still had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of achieving. His need to minimize my potential was becoming more obvious as my actual success became harder to ignore, though he remained unaware of the specific nature of my professional growth. Meanwhile, my investigation into his relationship with Sophia had revealed cracks in their seemingly perfect plan. Richard Blackwood's business was facing more serious regulatory challenges than David had realized, and several key employees had left Blackwood Financial Group for more stable positions with competing firms. The partnership David was counting on was looking increasingly uncertain as the company struggled to maintain its client base and regulatory standing. More intriguingly, I had learned through my growing network of professional contacts that Sophia's reputation within Denver's social circles was more complicated than her polished exterior suggested. She had a history of dramatic relationships with ambitious men, and several people mentioned whispered concerns about her stability and judgment. The princess David thought he was winning was apparently viewed with skepticism by many people who knew her well. This information gave me confidence that David's carefully planned future was built on shakier ground than he realized, but it also made me more determined to ensure my own plans were bulletproof. I couldn't control what happened to his career or his relationship with Sophia, but I could guarantee that my financial independence and professional success would survive whatever chaos might emerge from their eventual revelation. The opportunity to test this new strength came sooner than expected. Rebecca called me one afternoon in late October with urgent news that would accelerate everything I had been planning. "Emma, I need you to sit down," she said, her voice tight, with controlled excitement. "I just received a call from a contact at the state regulatory office. Blackwood Financial Group is about to be hit with major sanctions for mishandling client funds. The announcement will be public by Friday, and it's going to be devastating for everyone associated with the firm." My pulse quickened as I processed this information. What kind of sanctions? And how will this affect David? "The kind that ends careers," Rebecca replied grimly. "Richard Blackwood has been using client money to cover personal expenses and business debts. When the investigation concludes, which should be within days, he'll likely face criminal charges. The firm will be shut down, and anyone in leadership positions will be permanently barred from working in financial services." The implications were staggering. David's promotion timeline wasn't just uncertain. His entire career path was about to be destroyed. The partnership he had been pursuing would disappear along with the company itself. More personally devastating, his relationship with Sophia would likely crumble when her father's crimes became public knowledge and the family's wealth evaporated in legal fees and restitution payments. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "My contact mentioned that several employees are being investigated for potential complicity in the fraud. David's name came up specifically because of some suspicious transactions he processed in the past 6 months. He might not just lose his job, he could face criminal charges." I sat in my car outside the office building where I had just finished a client meeting, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Rebecca was telling me. David's secret plan to leave me for Sophia wasn't just morally reprehensible. It was about to become a complete disaster that would destroy everything he had worked to achieve. The career advancement he was counting on would disappear. The wealthy family he was planning to marry into would be disgraced and potentially bankrupt, and his own professional reputation would be permanently ruined. "What should I do?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "File for divorce immediately," Rebecca said without hesitation. "Before the scandal breaks and before David realizes how bad this is going to be for him. We need to secure your share of marital assets before he starts trying to hide money or blame you for his problems. Once the Blackwood situation becomes public, David will be desperate and potentially dangerous to your financial security." That evening, I sat in my newly furnished home office, looking out at the Denver skyline and contemplating the strange turns my life had taken. 6 months earlier, I had been a naive wife who trusted her husband completely and had no idea that her marriage was built on deception. Now, I was a successful business owner who was about to file for divorce from a man whose career was imploding due to his own poor judgment and criminal associations. The transformation felt surreal, but it also felt inevitable. David had created this situation through his choices, his decision to have an affair, his choice to hide assets and deceive me financially, his willingness to associate with Richard Blackwood despite obvious ethical red flags, and his assumption that he could control the timing and consequences of his betrayal. Every element of the crisis he was about to face was the direct result of his own actions and character flaws. I called Rebecca and scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning. "I want to file for divorce before the Blackwood story breaks," I told her. "And I want to make sure David understands exactly how much I know about his deception and financial manipulation." "Are you sure you want to confront him directly?" Rebecca asked. "It might be strategically better to let him find out about the divorce filing without advance warning." I considered this advice, but something inside me needed David to understand that his plan had failed, not because of bad luck or external circumstances, but because he had fundamentally underestimated the woman he thought he could discard. "I want him to know that I've been aware of his affair and his financial deception for months," I said firmly. "I want him to realize that while he was planning my abandonment, I was building my own success story." Rebecca laughed, though not unkindly. "Emma, you've changed dramatically since this whole situation began. The woman I met in that coffee shop 6 months ago was devastated and looking for protection. Now you sound like someone who's ready to go on the offensive." She was right. The scared nurse who had discovered those clothes in her bedroom had evolved into someone who could analyze complex financial situations, build a successful business from scratch, and navigate the politics of professional networking with confidence and skill. David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in ways I was only beginning to understand. The next morning, I filed for divorce in Denver County Court, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting equitable distribution of all marital assets, including the hidden accounts and investments that David thought I didn't know about. Rebecca had prepared a comprehensive filing that documented his affair with Sophia, his financial deception, and his attempts to minimize my share of our shared wealth. The document was a masterpiece of legal strategy that would make it nearly impossible for David to claim ignorance or innocence. That afternoon, the Blackwood Financial Group scandal broke across Denver's business news exactly as Rebecca had predicted. Richard Blackwood was arrested at his downtown office, charged with embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering involving millions of dollars in client funds. The company's assets were frozen pending investigation, and all employees were suspended indefinitely while authorities determined the scope of the criminal activity. David's name appeared in several news reports as a senior employee who was being investigated for potential involvement in the fraudulent transactions. His photograph, taken during a company event with Sophia at his side, was published in the Denver Post business section alongside speculation about his role in his boss's criminal enterprise. I was reviewing client portfolios in my home office when David called, his voice shaking with panic and disbelief. Something terrible has happened. Richard has been arrested, and they're saying I might be involved in something I know nothing about. I need to come home immediately so we can figure out how to handle this. The assumption that I would automatically support him through this crisis, that I would stand by him as his world collapsed despite his secret plans to abandon me, was almost breathtaking in its narcissism. He still believed that I was the loyal wife who would sacrifice anything to protect his interests, even as those interests included his relationship with another woman. "David, I think you should stay wherever you are tonight," I said calmly. "We need to talk, but not until you've had time to process what's happening with your career." "What do you mean?" I need you right now. This is the biggest crisis I've ever faced, and I need to know that you're with me." The irony was exquisite. The man who had been planning to leave me for his boss's daughter was now begging for my support as that same boss faced criminal charges and his carefully constructed future crumbled around him. "I'll be here when you're ready to have an honest conversation," I said. "But it's going to be a very different conversation than you're expecting." After ending the call, I sat quietly in my office, watching the sun set over the mountains and reflecting on the strange justice of the situation. David had thought he was smart enough to plan a strategic exit from our marriage that would maximize his benefit and minimize mine. He had assumed that I would remain passive and grateful for whatever scraps he chose to offer me after building his new life with Sophia. Instead, his deception had catalyzed my own transformation into someone who was financially independent, professionally successful, and completely prepared for whatever legal battle lay ahead. While he had been focused on advancement through association with the Blackwood family, I had been building real value through my own skills and effort. Now his borrowed success was evaporating while mine continued to grow. When David finally came home that evening, he looked like a man who had aged 5 years in a single day. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who had just watched his entire future disappear. He found me in the living room, calmly reading a book while classical music played softly in the background. "We need to talk about what happens next," he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "My lawyer says the investigation could take months, and I might not be able to work in finance again even if I'm cleared of criminal charges. We're going to need to be very careful with money until this gets resolved." I looked up from my book, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in months. "Actually, David, I think you're going to need to be careful with money. I'll be fine." His confusion was evident. "What do you mean?" We're in this together. Whatever happens to me affects both of us." I closed my book and set it aside, preparing for the conversation that would finally bring our marriage's deception into the open. "Actually, we're not in this together. We haven't been for quite some time. I found Sophia's clothes in our bedroom 6 months ago, along with evidence of your affair and your plans to leave me. I know about the hidden accounts, the financial manipulation, and your timeline for ending our marriage after securing your promotion at Blackwood Financial." The color drained from his face as he processed my words. For several seconds, he sat in stunned silence, calculating how much I might know and how long I had been aware of his deception. When he finally spoke, His voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to prepare for this conversation," I replied evenly. "Long enough to protect myself financially and legally. Long enough to build a life that doesn't depend on your success or your presence." As the full implications of what I was telling him began to sink in, David's expression shifted from confusion to growing alarm. The woman he had planned to discard was not only aware of his betrayal, but had been actively preparing for it, while he remained obliviously confident in his control over the situation. The reckoning he never saw coming was about to begin. The silence in our living room stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. David stared at me as if seeing a stranger, his mind clearly racing through months of interactions, searching for clues he had missed about my awareness of his betrayal. The confident man who had walked out that morning believing he controlled every aspect of our relationship's future now sat before me as someone whose entire world had collapsed in a single day. "Emma, I can explain everything," he finally managed, though his voice lacked conviction. "Sophia and I, it's complicated, but it's not what you think. And the financial stuff. I was just trying to protect our assets in case something like this Blackwood situation ever happened." I almost laughed at the audacity of his attempt to reframe months of calculated deception as protective planning. Even now, faced with irrefutable evidence of his betrayal, David was trying to manipulate the narrative to make himself appear as the misunderstood hero rather than the unfaithful husband who had systematically planned my abandonment. "David, I've read your emails," I said quietly. "All of them. I know about your timeline for leaving me after securing your promotion. I know about the hidden accounts and the deliberately understated income. I know about the weekend trips to Aspen and the jewelry you bought for Sophia with money you told me we couldn't afford to spend. There's nothing left to explain." His face went through a series of expressions as the full scope of my knowledge became clear. First shock, then calculation as he tried to determine how to minimize the damage, then something approaching desperation, as he realized that his carefully constructed lies had been exposed completely. "How long?" he asked again, though I suspected he was really asking how long I had been planning my own strategy while he remained unaware. "Long enough to build Emma Collins' financial planning into a business that's already more successful than your career ever was," I replied, watching his eyes widen as he processed this information. "Long enough to secure my own financial independence so that whatever happens to you won't affect my ability to thrive. Long enough to realize that the biggest favor you ever did me was showing me who you really are." David's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to comprehend what I was telling him. The idea that his betrayed wife had not only discovered his deception, but had used that knowledge to launch her own successful career was clearly beyond anything he had imagined possible. "You started a business?" he said incredulously. "Emma, you're a nurse. You don't know anything about running a company or managing finances. This is probably some kind of hobby that's gotten out of hand." The condescension in his voice was automatic, a reflexive attempt to diminish my achievements and restore his sense of superiority, even as his own world crumbled around him. But his words no longer had the power to undermine my confidence. I had spent months proving to myself and others that I possessed skills and intelligence that David had never bothered to recognize or value. "Actually, I know quite a lot about managing finances," I said calmly. "I learned from listening to you talk about your work for 8 years, though apparently I was paying better attention than you realized. Emma Collins Financial Planning specializes in wealth management for healthcare professionals, and we currently manage over $2 million in client assets. My monthly income from the business is actually higher than your salary at Blackwood Financial was, back when you still had a job." The numbers hit him like physical blows. David had always been competitive about financial success, viewing money as a measure of intelligence and worth. The revelation that his discarded wife had not only matched, but exceeded his earning potential while he wasn't even aware she was working, was clearly devastating to his self-image. "That's impossible," he said, though his voice suggested he was beginning to believe it might be true. "You've been working at the hospital full-time. When would you have had time to build a business?" "While you were having dinner with Sophia," I replied. "While you were taking romantic weekend trips that you told me were business conferences. While you were planning our divorce timeline and calculating how to minimize your financial obligations to me. I was building something real, based on my own abilities rather than borrowed connections to wealthy families." David's face flushed as the full irony of the situation became clear to him. He had been planning to leave me for a woman whose family's wealth and influence would advance his career, only to discover that those same family connections were about to destroy his professional future while his abandoned wife built her own success story. "The divorce papers were filed this morning," I continued, pulling the official documents from the folder beside my chair. "Rebecca Chen is representing me, and she's documented everything: the affair, the hidden assets, the financial manipulation, all of it. The court will have a complete picture of your deception when we begin asset division proceedings." David's hands shook slightly as he took the papers, scanning the legal language that formally ended our marriage and outlined my claims to marital property. His face grew paler with each page as he realized how thoroughly his financial manipulation had been exposed and documented. "Emma, please," he said, and for the first time his voice carried genuine desperation rather than calculated charm. "I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Sophia was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. And the money situation, I can explain all of that. We don't need to throw away 8 years of marriage over something that can be fixed." The plea was pathetic in its transparency. David wasn't asking for forgiveness or expressing remorse for his betrayal. He was trying to negotiate his way out of consequences now that his carefully planned future had evaporated. The partnership he had been counting on was gone. The wealthy family he had planned to marry into was facing financial ruin and criminal investigation, and his own career prospects had been permanently destroyed. Suddenly, the stable marriage he had been planning to abandon looked like his only remaining option for financial security. "You're right that we don't need to throw away 8 years of marriage," I agreed. "You already did that when you started, planning my replacement while lying to my face every single day. The woman you're looking at now isn't the same person you married, David. That woman was naive enough to believe that supporting your ambitions meant sacrificing her own. This woman knows exactly what she's worth, and it's considerably more than you ever gave her credit for." I stood up, gathering my files and preparing to end this conversation on my terms, rather than allowing David to drag it out in hopes of finding some angle he could exploit. "You can stay here tonight if you need to, but tomorrow I want you to find somewhere else to live while the divorce proceedings move forward. Rebecca will be in touch with your attorney once you retain one." "Emma, wait," David called as I headed toward the stairs. "What about Sophia? What happens to her when all this comes out?" I paused, considering whether to answer this question. Part of me was curious about his concern for the woman he had planned to marry, whether it represented genuine care or simply anxiety about losing his backup plan now that our marriage was ending. "I imagine Sophia will do exactly what you did when you started your relationship with her," I said finally. "She'll look for someone who can provide the lifestyle and security she's accustomed to. The difference is that when she abandons you for a better option, she'll be doing it honestly instead of pretending to love you while secretly planning your replacement." The observation landed with devastating accuracy. David's relationship with Sophia had been built on mutual opportunism rather than genuine affection, and both of them were pragmatic enough to recognize when circumstances made their partnership disadvantageous. With Richard Blackwood facing criminal charges and the family's wealth tied up in legal proceedings, Sophia would have little incentive to remain loyal to a man whose career had been destroyed by association with her father's crimes. I left David, sitting alone in our living room, surrounded by divorce papers and the wreckage of plans that had seemed so clever just hours earlier. As I climbed the stairs to the bedroom where I had first discovered evidence of his betrayal, I felt a profound sense of completion rather than triumph. This wasn't about revenge or proving my superiority. It was about finally aligning my external circumstances with my internal growth. The next morning, I woke up to find David gone, though he had left a note saying he was staying with a friend while he figured out his legal situation. I spent the day in my home office, managing client portfolios and planning the expansion of Emma Collins Financial Planning into new service areas. The business had grown beyond my wildest expectations, but more importantly, it had given me a professional identity that belonged entirely to me. Dr. Sarah Mitchell called that afternoon with news that perfectly captured the strange justice of recent events. "Emma, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I heard through the hospital grapevine that you're getting divorced. I wanted you to know that whatever personal challenges you're facing, your professional reputation is stronger than ever. I've been recommending your services to colleagues in other hospitals, and there's considerable interest in expanding your business to serve medical professionals throughout Colorado." The opportunity was exciting and slightly overwhelming. Growing Emma Collins Financial Planning into a statewide practice would require significant investment and careful planning. But it represented the kind of professional challenge I had never imagined pursuing during my marriage. Supporting David's ambitions had felt like enough purpose for my life, but building something entirely my own was proving far more fulfilling than I had ever expected. "I'm definitely interested," I told Dr. Mitchell. "My personal situation is actually quite positive despite the divorce. Sometimes ending one chapter of your life is exactly what you need to begin a much better one." 3 weeks later, I received a call from Rebecca with an update on David's legal situation that provided a fitting conclusion to his story of calculated betrayal. "David's attorney contacted me about the divorce settlement," she said, her voice carrying barely suppressed amusement. "Apparently, he's eager to finalize everything quickly because he's been offered a job in Seattle and wants to relocate before his involvement in the Blackwood scandal becomes more widely known." "What kind of job?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be telling. "Insurance sales," Rebecca replied, confirming my suspicions. "It's a significant step down from his previous position, but it's one of the few industries that will hire someone with his current reputation problems. He's also apparently no longer in contact with Sophia, who has reportedly left Denver to stay with relatives in California while her father's legal situation plays out." The image of David selling insurance in Seattle, abandoned by the woman he had betrayed me for and reduced to rebuilding his career from scratch in his late 30s, should have felt like vindication. Instead, it simply felt like the natural consequence of choices he had made. He had prioritized short-term advantage over long-term integrity, and now he was experiencing the predictable results of that strategy. "He's agreed to the asset division we proposed," Rebecca continued. "Full disclosure of all accounts, equitable distribution of investments, and he's not contesting your claim to the hidden assets. I think he's realized that fighting you in court would only draw more attention to his financial manipulation, which could complicate his legal situation with the Blackwood investigation." The settlement was more generous than I had expected, but it felt like acknowledgement of justice rather than unexpected windfall. The money David had tried to hide from me was rightfully mine as marital property, and his decision to surrender it without contest was simply recognition of reality rather than any gesture of generosity or remorse. 6 months after discovering those emerald silk clothes in my bedroom, I stood in the conference room of my new downtown office, addressing a room full of healthcare professionals who had gathered for the launch of Colorado Medical Financial Services, the expanded version of my consulting practice. The business had grown to serve over 40 clients across 3 cities, and my team now included 2 associate planners and a full-time administrative assistant. The goal of Colorado Medical Financial Services has always been to provide financial planning that understands the unique challenges of medical careers, I told the assembled doctors, nurses, and healthcare administrators. We know that your income patterns, liability concerns, and retirement needs are different from other professionals, and our strategies are designed specifically for your circumstances. The presentation was well received, and several attendees approached me afterward to discuss their specific financial planning needs. As I scheduled follow-up meetings and handed out business cards, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. David's betrayal had initially felt like the end of everything I had worked to build, but it had actually been the beginning of a life far more authentic and fulfilling than the one I had lost. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Morrison, a fellow financial planner who had become both a business mentor and personal friend over the past few months. Saw the article about your business expansion in the Denver Business Journal. Congratulations on building something impressive. Dinner. Tonight to celebrate? I smiled as I typed my response, appreciating both the professional recognition and the personal connection that had developed naturally rather than being calculated for strategic advantage. Jake was successful in his own right, attracted to my intelligence and ambition rather than viewing me as a supporting character in his own story. The relationship was still new and cautious, but it felt healthier and more genuine than anything I had experienced in years. That evening, as I walked through the lobby of the upscale restaurant where Jake and I had arranged to meet, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirrored walls and barely recognized the confident woman looking back at me. The scared nurse, who had discovered her husband's affair 6 months earlier, had been replaced by someone who carried herself with the assurance that came from building success through her own efforts rather than borrowing it from someone else's achievements. Jake was waiting at our table, reviewing something on his phone that he quickly put away when he saw me approaching. "Emma, you look radiant," he said, standing to greet me with the kind of respectful affection that felt both comfortable and exciting. "Success suits you incredibly well." "Thank you," I replied, settling into my chair and accepting the wine he had already ordered. It feels strange to say this, but I think I'm finally living the life I was meant to have. It just took a devastating betrayal to show me what I was capable of achieving. As we talked about business opportunities, personal goals, and the possibility of planning a weekend trip together, I found myself thinking about David's current situation in Seattle. He was probably working long hours trying to rebuild a career that would never again reach the heights he had once expected to achieve. His relationship with Sophia had ended as pragmatically as it had begun, leaving him alone in a new city with a damaged reputation and limited prospects. But I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, just as I felt no bitterness about the pain his betrayal had caused me. Both of our lives had been fundamentally changed by his decision to pursue what he thought was a better option, but the consequences had been distributed according to our respective characters and choices. He had built his plans on deception and opportunism, while I had responded to crisis with integrity and genuine effort. The different outcomes we experienced reflected those different approaches to challenge and change. The woman who had once supported her husband's dreams without question had discovered that her own dreams were far more achievable and satisfying than anything she had sacrificed them for. The emerald silk blouse that had shattered my world had ultimately been the catalyst for building a better one. And for that unexpected gift, I would always be grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.